Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Great Fiction Podcast. Today, I am the only host, but I do have a really awesome guest that I think you guys are going to like listening to. If you're familiar with the other episodes, you know I like to interview what we call the anti-intellectual intellectuals. These are individuals who are standing up for the truth in academia and in the media. And they're individuals who, frankly, are helping keep what's left of our civilization together. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you guys to Dr. Michael J. New.
The entire statist edifice can be brought down if only the work of the intellectuals is countered by the work of anti-intellectual intellectuals, as I like to call them.
So Dr. New has a PhD in political science and a master's degree in statistics. He served as a postdoctoral fellow at the Harvard MIT Data Center. He formerly worked with the Cato Institute, and currently he's a research associate of political science and social research at the Catholic University of America. Welcome, Dr. New.
Thanks for having me. Much appreciated.
So I'll start with asking you what happened, basically. What happened with this whole Supreme Court? We just want to hear your expert opinion.
Sure. What happened last week, and this was last Friday, was the Supreme Court, after 49 years, overturned Roe v. Wade. And that was a very exciting moment for those of us in the pro-life movement. And, just a little bit of background, the Supreme Court, handed out a ruling on Roe v. Wade in 1973. Effectively, it legalized abortion on demand throughout all 9 months of pregnancy in all 50 states. And reversing this ruling has been a long-term goal of pro-lifers. And even though the policy position that was kind of imposed on us by the court is unpopular, it took us a while to, change this decision or overturn this decision, just because the Supreme Court, doesn't review every case that's appealed to it. They typically don't review major abortion cases, all that often. So even though I think aspects of this decision were very unpopular, status quo tends to prevail in politics, especially with judicial rulings. So it took some 49 years. And the case that, gave us the reversal was a case that came out of Mississippi. The state legislature there passed a ban on abortion that would protect preborn children after 15 weeks gestation. It was signed into law by the governor, and like most pro-life laws, was quickly challenged. And it was appealed, and the Supreme Court agreed to hear the appeal. And there were a few different things they could have done. I mean, there was always a chance that they could have just looked at the constitutionality of this Mississippi law and not engaged Roe v. Wade at all. So there was always a possibility that, they could have simply just upheld this 15-week ban, but not really gone further. But thankfully, the Supreme Court, did go ahead and not only upheld the law, but overturned Roe v. Wade. And right now, for the first time since 1973, we can protect preborn children at the state level, using legislation. And right now, again, numbers are kind of in flux a bit because there's still some ongoing legal challenges. But it's my understanding that roughly 11 states right now are protecting preborn children throughout pregnancy. About one state, Ohio, has a heartbeat law in effect that protects unborn children after a fetal heartbeat can be detected. I think in a few weeks or a month's time, the estimates I'm hearing indicate 16 states will be protecting preborn children throughout pregnancy, and another 3 states will be protecting preborn children after fetal heartbeat can be detected. So, again, obviously we just can't rely on passing laws. We have to do things to support pregnancy help centers and do other things to help women in need. But it's a great victory for pro-lifers.
Right. And now that on the state level, we're beginning these processes with abortion restrictions, a lot of people on both sides are wondering, well, what's going to happen next? People are wondering what the effects of abortion restrictions are. And I know recently you did some articles on the Texas abortion restrictions. Mm-hmm. So what happened there?
Well, sure. Texas is really the first state that really passed a pro-life law that was upheld, that really did provide some significant protection for the preborn. Previously we've tinkered the margins. We've limited public funding for abortion through state Medicaid programs. We've passed parental involvement laws, waiting periods, and incrementally, I think those laws do some good. Texas did pass a heartbeat bill. They had kind of a unique enforcement mechanism. Essentially there was a private right of enforcement that made this bill difficult to overturn. So, this bill took effect September 1st. 2021. And you can see kind of pretty much instantaneously it had a real impact. That we get data from the state health department in Texas, and it seemed pretty clearly, that abortion numbers are cut, around 40%, 50% right away. And that's been pretty consistent since this law has been in effect. Now, obviously, laws are important. They're not magical. I mean, I'm not naive about what's happening. There are Texas women who have obtained abortions in other states where the laws are more permissive. There's a good chance some Texas women have obtained abortions by ordering chemical abortion pills through the mail, but it's still having a real impact. And even the Washington Post had a story a week or so ago about a couple. The woman did find herself pregnant shortly after this heartbeat bill took effect, and she was unwilling to go out of state for an abortion. She carried her twins to term. Her partner is stepping up and supporting the children that she has, and it's a good story showing how these laws can have a positive impact.
Right, and along with Roe v. Wade, we had Casey overturned too. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, I've didn't really go through the whole abortion jurisprudence. I mean, this is kind of the second time the Supreme Court really considered, its holdings in Roe v. Wade. Back in 1992, there was a Casey decision, known as Casey v. Planned Parenthood, and that dealt with a Pennsylvania bill called the Pennsylvania Abortion Control Act, which was a kind of a variety of incremental measures. It included a waiting period. It included an informed consent law. Again, this is a law that would give women seeking abortion information about things like health risks, field development, sources of support for pregnant women. Included a spousal notice provision that would require a married woman to, I think, notify her husband before obtaining an abortion. And at this time, again, it was how this was decided in 1992. And at that time, we elected President Reagan and George H.W. Bush, and those were two people who ran two pro-life presidents. Between them, they put 5 judges on the Supreme Court. So many of the pro-life movement in the early 90s thought the Supreme Court would use Casey as a chance to overturn Roe v. Wade. And when they didn't do so, it was a real disappointment and a real setback. But they did weaken Roe v. Wade a little bit. When Roe v. Wade was handed down, it had like a trimester system that basically said that you could regulate abortion more and more, in subsequent trimesters. Now, all those regulations were kind of subject to a health exemption that was pretty broad, and in practice didn't really allow pro-lifers to do much. So, effectively, Roe v. Wade, again, as I said, did legalize abortion throughout all 9 months of pregnancy in all 50 states. Casey tweaked that a little bit. Casey, they came with a standard of what they called undue burden. And that meant that states could regulate abortion as long as that regulation did not pose an undue burden to the woman seeking an abortion. And the phrase undue burden, is a little bit vague, but just means that it could be regulated as long as that regulation didn't really pose a substantial obstacle to a woman who wanted an abortion. And granted, that wasn't a great outcome, but let's do a little bit more. For instance, one thing we could do after Casey was waiting periods, 24, 48, 72 hours. Another thing we could do after Casey was, again, informed consent laws. Again, these are laws that require women seeking abortion to get some information about alternatives to abortion. So it did give us a little more running room at the state level to do some different things. But Friday's ruling overturned Roe and Casey. Right now we are legally free to go ahead and protect preborn children at the state level. Again, there will be some litigation about some of the trigger laws that were put in place. Some states did put laws in place that would immediately go into effect should Roe be overturned. There's, I think, some litigation about the wording, the structure of them. But in the long term, I'm confident we will be able to put laws in place that really, provide pretty solid protection for the preborn, in the various states.
And I see with the threat of pro-life laws on the horizon, a lot of pro-choicers want to argue, oh, well, you can ban abortion, but it's not actually going to stop abortions. That's a very common argument we hear. But I know you did at least 2 papers. There's 2 I'm familiar with from 2011 and 2014, I believe, where you talked about these laws you were just speaking of after Casey. And you said state level anti-abortion legislation result in statistically significant declines in both the abortion rate and the abortion ratio. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you went about this research and found these results.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was interesting. My PhD is in political science, and basically it dealt with state level budget rules and fiscal limits. That actually might also be interesting to some of your listeners. But one thing I was interested in is I kind of studied a lot of rules and limits that were put in place during the 1970s tax revolt. And one thing I noticed is that in a lot of cases, people try to pass different kinds of laws to limit the size of government or limit government growth. And the long term, a lot of these laws and limits just were not all that effective. You know, and I kind of got the wheels in my head turning. Just because people are interested in doing something good or they're trying to achieve something doesn't mean the legislation that they're proposing or enacting is going to be effective at pursuing that goal or moving forward that goal. So essentially I kind of I was always pro-life. I never really given much thought about how to combine my interest in pro-life issues with academic research. But I just noticed pro-lifers are out there trying very hard to pass laws at the state level and spending a lot of time, a lot of energy doing so. Are these laws actually doing any good? So, I kind of got the idea to pursue a research project on this. And, there was state level data on abortion from the CDC. It didn't seem like anybody was doing all that much with it. So, I put together a data set. By this time I had left Stanford where I got my PhD. I was living in Boston. I had a research job at Harvard, and I, was doing some other freelance projects on the side. And it was interesting. As I got started on this project, I was having a very tough time getting kind of a good data set of what states had passed what laws at what time. The only group at that time, this is around 2002, 2003, that was really tracking this was NARAL, National Abortion Rights Action League. Every year they come with a publication called Who Decides, and lists every state and all the pro-life laws that state passed that year. Getting a complete set of these booklets is very tough to do. NARAL doesn't really archive old versions online. Even the Library of Congress doesn't really have a good archive of them. But I found they actually willed away their archives to the Women's Library at Harvard University. So I joke they will them away to a place where no self-respecting pro-life person would ever set foot. And they're all right there waiting for me. So I was able to use some of the information in these booklets to put together a data set of what states had passed what laws at what time. And my plan was to do a study and have it out by January 2003. I wanted something in time for the 30th anniversary of Roe v. Wade. I had some results. I wasn't really plugged in real well. I circulated them. Whatever response I got was kind of lukewarm. So the anniversary comes and goes. But that spring, the J.F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard had a visiting fellow program. And a visiting fellow that spring was a guy named Stuart Butler, who at the time was the vice president of domestic policy at Heritage Foundation. And Stuart Butler ran a healthcare seminar or a health policy seminar that I attended. And I got to know him a little bit. And I pitched the idea about, would Heritage be interested in doing a study on pro-life laws? And he was interested, but a little bit concerned. At this time, Heritage focused mostly on economics and foreign policy. They did not really do all that much on social issues. So they were interested, but a little bit concerned. They actually had an intern reconstruct my entire data set from scratch. This is data from nearly all 50 states, holding constant a pretty wide range of demographic variables, economic variables. He found a few minor errors, but nothing that changed my results in a substantive way, and said this is good to go. So on the day of the March for Life of 2004, they published my study. And it did find that a lot of the incremental laws do have an impact. If your state, funds abortion through its Medicaid program and stops, that lowers the abortion rate. That cutting off taxpayer funding for abortion gets numbers down. That's a very well-documented finding that a lot of studies would agree with. Pro-life parental involvement laws, reduce minor abortion rates. Properly designed informed consent laws, just giving women alternatives, putting in place a 24-hour waiting period. That has at least, when the laws are well designed, that has a positive effect. So, the study was published in 2004, and, I kind of thought pro-lifers would come by and, pat me on my head and tell me what a great guy I was and thank me for the study. That'd be it. Didn't work out that way. People were very excited about the study, excited about the findings. One thing I didn't really realize or even think much about was that the pro-life movement really did not have its own kind of in-house social scientist. We had people studying public health. We had people, studying some other things, but really nobody working on the social science. So that's what I was trained to do. I liked the issue, something I could do. And I just threw it over my shoulder and kept writing about it. So to this day, I write about abortion trends, pro-life laws, contraception programs, public opinion. I joke, I'm lots of fun at cocktail parties. If any of your listeners out there want to learn more about my writing and research, they can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Michael _J_new, and I tweet out my studies and commentary whenever they come out.
Yeah, I'm sure it doesn't take someone with a master's degree in statistics to tell us that these things that the Guttmacher Institute puts out, showing a little map the abortion restrictions by country and then showing the abortion rates by country, we know that doesn't mean that abortion restrictions don't reduce abortions. You're also familiar with the one study that goes over the Eastern Europe restrictions. I know you mentioned that one in your article on the Lazier Institute.
Yeah, that's, I think, even though I didn't author that study, I think that is the best study we have that really shows the impact of pro-life laws on abortion rates. I mean, the problem with all the studies that Guttmacher cranks out is that they just look at a pretty wide range of countries with varying abortion policies, and in some cases, there are countries where there are pro-life laws in place that still have relatively high abortion rates. But the problem is, really, a lot of the countries that have pro-life laws internationally are countries that are in Africa or South America or Central America or the Middle East. These countries have very high poverty rates. They have other social pathologies that may increase the perceived need for abortion. So you really can't make comparisons between, say, very low-income countries in Africa to industrial democracies in Europe. That's just a very poor comparison to make. But that's kind of, I think, how they try to mislead people. The strength of the study that looked at what happened in Eastern Europe is that it looked at what happens when you change abortion policy, in the same country. After the fall of communism, you had a fair number of countries in Eastern Europe change their abortion policy. Romania was protecting preborn children, and tragically, they made their abortion laws more permissive, and they made abortion legal. On the other hand, Poland put some very good protective pro-life laws in place in 1993. And I think of all the major kind of European countries, Poland right now has the best pro-life laws of any country. It's not, abortion is not completely illegal, but it's very heavily restricted. And very few abortions are performed in Poland, and a very high percentage of unintended pregnancies, are in fact carried to term. So the strength of the study was that it looked at policy changes in the same subset of countries over time. And it did show very clearly that when you pass very strong pro-life laws, you can get abortion numbers down 90-95%. That the law can have a real impact. Even modest kind of incremental laws, that require women to have certain reasons for having abortion or require counseling, they got abortion numbers down 20-25%. So a very well done piece of scholarship, I think, does document very clearly that pro-life laws work, and the instance of abortion is sensitive to its legal status.
Now, of course, I often show these various studies, including that one and the ones you've authored, to pro-choicers and show, well, look, you're wrong. It does decrease abortions, but usually the response you get is, well, oh, well, they're not counting the illegal abortions. So is there any process put into this research to try to account for the abortions that may happen illegally?
Well, one thing that's kind of interesting, and just kind of circling back to the first part of your question, Guttmacher doesn't really deny, when it comes down to it, that pro-life laws lower abortion rates. They just dodge the issue. They'll just say things, well, abortion rates can still be high. That doesn't, that's not disproving or disputing my point. So they never come out and say, no, pro-life laws don't work. They'll just kind of dodge the issue and just point out there's some countries where there are pro-life laws in place where abortion rates are still high. So I just wanted to kind of jump onto that real quickly. There's other ways we can document the effects of pro-life laws. Like, one thing that I think can be very useful to do, and has been done by some researchers, is look in the very short term what happens to the birth rate. And we actually do have good evidence from a number of well-done state-level studies, that whenever pro-life laws take effect, 7 months, 8 months later, there's a short-term increase in the birth rate. That happened, the minor birth rate went up in Texas and Massachusetts after parental involvement laws took effect in those states. That's been documented. North Carolina, there was a very interesting study there. North Carolina, up until the mid-1990s, they didn't actually fund abortion through Medicaid. What they did, and I think this was tragic, was that they had a abortion fund where the legislature would appropriate money into this fund, and there was a pool of money essentially that would be used to pay for abortions for low-income women. And what's interesting is sometimes this abortion fund would run out of money and wouldn't be replenished till the next fiscal year, or the next subsequent fiscal year. So researchers looked at what happens when the fund runs out of money, and they noticed that when the fund ran out of money, abortion rates went down and birth rates went up, and those trends were a lot more pronounced amongst low-income women and African-American women. So by just looking at the fact that more women carry pregnancies to term, after abortion pro-life laws go into effect, that's, again, very good evidence these laws have an impact.
So I I don't know if this is an area you know too much about, but as far as the effects on things like maternal mortality rates and deaths from pregnancy and things like that, are you very familiar with the effects that anti-abortion laws can have on that?
Sure. I mean, pro-life laws, are consistent with good public health. It's not one or the other. We can have good public health trends and also good pro-life laws in place. I can give you several examples. I mean, Poland, again, which I think has the best pro-life laws of any country in Europe, has one of the lowest, if not the lowest rate of maternal mortality in all of Europe. And again, they've had good pro-life laws in place since 1993. Tragically, Ireland changed their laws, recently, and now abortion is legal there. But up until that point, public health in Ireland was a lot better than a lot of its peer countries. They actually had lower maternal mortality rates than England and Wales and Scotland, and also a lower percentage of low weight births than England and Wales and Scotland. So again, if you look at countries that have pro-life laws in place that are industrialized democracies, that are wealthy, again, they have good public health outcomes. And again, another example I give is Texas. It's not quite the same example as some of the previous ones I gave, but back in 2010, the state legislature went ahead and they defunded Planned Parenthood, or I should say excluded Planned Parenthood from the state family planning program. A lot of people complained. Some people said this will be a public health disaster. It'll result in a big increase in things like teen pregnancies and teen births and teen abortions. That hasn't happened. Since 2010, 2011, minor births have fallen by more than 60% in Texas. Minor abortions have fallen by more than 60% in Texas. Now, some of these trends were occurring before that ban, the limit took effect, but it does show, again, you can have good positive public health trends with pro-life laws in place. And also, you don't need to fund Planned Parenthood to have good public health in your state.
All right, now, I probably should have brought this up a little bit earlier, but there's something I've noticed. I call it the presidential paradox when it comes to abortion restrictions. And I noticed this because there's this meme that you see on Twitter or on Facebook or whatever, and they show year by year the United States abortion rate, and then they show each sections by different color, by red and blue. Red represents Republican presidents, blue represents Democrat presidents, and what you see is, during Democrat presidents, abortion rates go down faster. What I've noticed is that, like we talked about Casey earlier, you saw a lot of these abortion restrictions while Clinton was president. And then later on, you have Obama. And I've noticed again, during Obama's presidency, you have a lot of restrictions again. So, and then now we see under Biden, Roe v. Wade got completely overturned, and there's going to be a lot more abortion restrictions. Mm-hmm. So is this something you've ever noticed?
Yep, at the Charlotte Lozier Institute, where the research education, I'm Susan B. Anthony Lister, I'm associate scholar. We call this the whack-a-mole game. This comes up all the time. Every election cycle. In 2024, I guarantee there'll be an op-ed that makes this exact case that, there were big abortion declines during Democratic presidential administrations. Therefore, pro-life people should support quote-unquote pro-abortion Democrats running for president. Very, frustrating because I think it's very misleading. Some of the memes, not all of them, some of the memes are misleading in the sense that one of the reasons why some statistics show a big decline in the Clinton administration is because the CDC quit reporting data from California. Or I should say California quit reporting data to the CDC. So when California quits reporting data, that causes abortion numbers to fall. In fact, there was somebody who tweeted something like that out, and it was someone who really should have known better. It wasn't like an activist. It was a pretty well-known journalist who tweeted this out, and it seemed completely oblivious to the fact the big decline during the Clinton years was due to the fact that California quit reporting, or the big reported decline in the Clinton years was due to the fact that California quit reporting data. I mean, it is true when you look at the trend that there are slightly larger abortion declines during Democratic presidential administrations, but the trend doesn't change that much. What you really see is after Roe v. Wade, we legalized abortion, and not surprisingly, abortion numbers go up, and the trend goes up until 1980. And 1980 is an important year because that's the year we actually got the Hyde Amendment, approved constitutionally. The Supreme Court did uphold the Hyde Amendment in Harris v. McRae. So even though we couldn't, protect preborn children, we could at least prevent the federal government from paying for elective abortions through the Medicaid program. So starting in 1980, you just see the abortion rate go down. And there's been a couple of hiccups, but it's been a durable decline. It went down during the Reagan administration, the first administration, the administration of George H.W. Bush, the Clinton administration, the administration of George W. Bush, the administration of President Obama. And again, we don't really have data on Trump just yet, or at least final data on the Trump administration just yet. So you just see a pretty durable decline that persists with some Democratic presidential administrations. Again, part of the reason why I think we see a larger decline during some Democrat administrations is because, again, we started pushing state laws a little more aggressively. When Clinton and Obama were in the White House, we couldn't really do much at the federal level. We had some opportunities in the states. And in both 1994 and 2010, Republicans big gains at the state level. So that did open up some doors for us at the state level to go ahead and pass more pro-life laws. And that's not the only reason, but I do think that gives at least some explanation about why you see some abortion declines during the Clinton years and the Obama years.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of explanations. It's definitely a lot more complex than a simple graph with two colors on it. So yeah, I think we've dispelled a couple of abortion myths. Are there any other particular myths that you would like to dispel?
I mean, the whole maternal mortality, I think, is interesting. I mean, there was the claim that when Texas defunded Planned Parenthood, it caused a big spike in maternal mortality, and that got all kinds of headlines. And again, even when you looked at the data, it didn't really make a lot of sense. The increase in maternal mortality really took effect before the Planned Parenthood cuts, really would have taken effect. And I was writing about this, at that time. And then, they did recalculate the maternal mortality rate. There were some errors that were made. I'm not saying it's not a problem, but the numbers didn't spike up as dramatically as some of the original reports indicated. And the corrected data, got some attention, but not nearly the amount as the original data did. It's just kind of frustrating that anytime there's a chance to put pro-life laws or pro-life policies in a bad light, the media pounces. When corrected data comes out, that's more accurate, that gets almost no attention. Another thing, just to correct, again, going back to, the example I gave before is, again, what happened when, Texas defunded or removed Planned Parenthood from the state family planning program. There was a study that came out that claimed that it did increase, either teen pregnancy rates or teen birth rates. Again, I think that the way the study was reported was misleading. If you read the study accurately, the study actually found a decrease in teen pregnancy rates. But basically, the author argued that teen pregnancy rates would be declining even faster had they not, cut Planned Parenthood funding. So the way the media reports it, it's like this, big teen pregnancy epidemic in Texas. No, I mean, the numbers went down. Her argument is that, numbers would have gone down a little bit faster had they not cut Planned Parenthood. I'm not sure that, this person's correct, but there was no teen pregnancy epidemic at all. I mean, we saw, again, big declines in teen births, teen pregnancies, teen abortions after Planned Parenthood was removed from the state family planning program.
I actually saw this recent study, which was very interesting, to say the least. So it didn't get a ton of media attention, but essentially the claim was banning abortion nationwide would lead to a 21% increase in the number of pregnancy-related deaths. And it was published in a journal, but again, it didn't get a lot of attention. But what I noticed is what the author does is say, oh, well, let's say every single pregnancy that ends in an abortion, it now ends in giving birth. Mm-hmm. And no exceptions, anything like that. And then now she's got this lovely little number to put on headlines, 21% increase in maternal mortality rate, even though even the raw number of these deaths was less than 150. It was, I believe it was 140. So like that whole thing, it is really not being very generous, because of course, a lot of these states, who have these restrictions and are putting in these restrictions, they're giving exceptions for cases when the mother's life is at risk or at risk of severe injury. And, she doesn't give any room for this. And I would say this is just blatant lying, really. And this is just all too common in this abortion research.
Yeah, and one problem is that we don't really have as good a data as we could about the health risks of abortion. The CDC does not track this nearly as carefully as they should. And, very often if a woman, does have some complications afterwards, the abortion facility may take the woman to a doctor who's quote unquote friendly to the abortion facility, and they may cite something else as the cause of injury or the cause of death. Again, we really, abortion is fairly unregulated in this country, at least was up until a week or so ago. Again, some states don't really report data to the CDC. California doesn't. Maryland doesn't. New Hampshire doesn't. So we don't really track, deaths and injuries nearly as well as we could. So these things talking about, higher risks of carrying a pregnancy to term rather than, having an abortion, I think is just very, very misleading.
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't have any more questions myself. If you have anything else you want to add before I wrap things up, then you can go ahead.
I just want to say these are exciting times. I think that according to a lot of analysts, we might be able to protect preborn children in about 26 states moving forward. But I just also want to encourage your listeners that, pro-lifers have to be more than just about passing laws. We really need to step up our efforts with pregnancy help. And we've done a good job. I mean, there's like 2,700 pregnancy help centers providing a very impressive range of services to women, but they're going to be facing more demands for their services. So I think as pro-lifers, we have to really step up and be generous and do what we can to help them. I always tell pro-life audiences that, identify a local pregnancy center and find some way to support them, whether it's with time, whether it's money. If you can only give a little, give a little. Sometimes a little goes a long way. And I also would encourage listeners that if you live in a blue state that can't do anything legislatively, there's always things you can do to build a culture of life, even if you live in New York or California where abortion will remain legal. You can if you're a faith, you can always pray. You can always support pregnancy help centers. You can always do things like sidewalk counseling, or be a prayer warrior outside an abortion facility. So just want to encourage everyone that these are exciting times, but this isn't the end for the pro-life movement. It's just the beginning.
And I would recommend that everybody, like Dr. New said, go follow him on Twitter. I will link his article that he has for the Lazier Institute, where he talks about the effectiveness of abortion laws. He links his papers in there. He links the paper on Eastern Europe. So if anyone encounters that argument, well, it's not going to decrease the abortion rates, then you have the proper resources to address that. And I think that's all set. So thank you again, Dr. New, for joining, and I'll see you guys next time.
All right. Thanks for having me.